This computer. All right, welcome to week 5, day 3. Almost the end of the week here. We're changing it up a little bit. Up until now, we've been learning about classes, class composition, class inheritance, all that good stuff. We've been working with a lot of data, kind of just creating these instances of objects and manipulating them with different attributes. But up until this point, when we run that script, we see it in our console. And then if we terminate that console, it's gone forever unless we rerun the script. So we don't want that in real life. We want our data to persist that we're working with, especially if we're serving it up on websites and the like. So we're going to be kind of getting an intro to databases right now. We are going to pretty much go through the README. I do have an extra example at the end we'll walk through as well, just to have fun with. But what is a database? So it's just storing and organizing information on a computer. Does anybody have experience working with databases? I see a couple of yeses, or a yes, couple no's. Nicole, you shook your head yes for databases?
Yeah.
Can you kind of give me, so what kind of database did you use?
We
And
MongoDB.
okay.
Just it was all tables and JSONs, and it was super fun trying to change stuff because we couldn't use 3T to access it. So we had to use PuTTY
Oh, yes.
to
Yes.
change anything. So it was a pain in the butt.
So fun. So MongoDB, we are not going to cover that in this class because that is what's called a NoSQL database. In this class, we focus on SQL databases, which does anybody know what a SQL database is? And this says it's going to be covered next week. That's lying. We moved some curriculum around, so it's actually not for another few weeks. I think 2 or 3. But SQL, what do we think that is?
Structured query language.
A structured
Something.
query language. Yeah, exactly. Do, do we know how that kind of database works? Or how people kind of refer to that?
Just makes things easy to sort through your data, and join different tables of data, I guess. And like and I guess because what Postgres is public, like anybody can use it, and then there's a smaller version, SQLite. So it just makes it easier to join large chunks of data.
Yes, exactly. So the big keyword there you used a lot was join data. So SQL is what we call a relational database, where you can relate a whole bunch of different pieces of data to each other. And we'll learn all about that later. MongoDB is a NoSQL because it doesn't relate to each other in any way, shape, or form. It's just basically like all the JSON that you would get back from an API request, which we will also cover later. But so we're going to start off with pretty much the most simple form of database that you could use. There's an argument that it's not really a database or it is. You can go ahead and Google it and see both sides of the story there. But we're looking at CSVs. Does anybody know what CSV stands for? No? All right. Well, let's look at, this is a CSV file here.
Is it comma separated values?
Yes, correct. Comma separated values. So we can see here we have a whole bunch of words and values separated by commas. So that is the structure of this file. Up here are the headers. Usually the first line is going to be the headers. And then the rest of it are each rows. Basically, you could look at this as an Excel spreadsheet. This would be the headers up top of the column names. And then these are the rows with all their data underneath each of these columns. They're not lined up all pretty because they don't need to be, because we use commas to separate them. This is telling me, this file is telling me that everything in this first position before the first comma is going to be an ID. So these are all IDs down. Anything in between the first and second comma is a team, and so on. So that is how comma separated files work. And you can see right there the table. If we were to put it in Excel, which you can open CSVs in Excel and look at them, it would put it in a nice table like that, separating by the commas. So there are features within Python that lets us read these files like we would query a database, and write into these files like we would, put values into the database. So we are going to look at that today because it's time we start having data stick around instead of leaving immediately after we run the script. So if you want to follow along, we're going to pretty much be doing what the README is doing today. You can open up a blank VS Code. We're going to have a Python file, and then we're also going to have a CSV file as well. For ease, you can just keep it in the same level as our Python file. Okay, so I'm going to copy the sports team stuff that we had from the README. This is going to go in our CSV. There are extensions you can download, which I have here, that makes it a bit easier to see what data is underneath which column. Because when you have really long CSVs, they can jumble together and you don't always want to sit there and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, try to figure out what the column header is. Okay, so let's go back. That's our CSV file. Let's go back to our Python file, and we are going to see that we can use a built-in Python library that is going to read this information in. What does it mean, read this information in, when I say that? Anybody want to take a stab at layman's terms, what we think? Because when I say read information in, that's a very technical explanation. So right now in this file, can I see anything in this CSV file? If this wasn't here, I had nothing here, can I see anything in this other file? No, usually if we want to see like a function from another file or a class from another file, we usually do an import statement at the top, right? To basically bring in that information so we can use it. I want to see this information. I want to be able to see it and work with it, but it's in a completely different location. It's in a different file. I can't see it. Can't just import it because Python doesn't know how to handle it. If I were to just say, no, import the CSV file, it's going to be like, what? I don't have any idea what you mean, obviously. So instead of doing something like that, we have this right here. We still need to import something because the library is built in, but we need to be able to access it within our file. So we're going to import something called CSV. And we can also, let's see, control click on it, and you can come read pretty much all the behind the scenes of how Python gets into CSV files. But if that's overwhelming, don't worry about it. So this structure is going to pretty much stay the same across the board for this, for reading a CSV file and accessing the information. We start off saying with open. Open expects, as we can see here when we hover over this, open expects a file. It also has, we can pass in a mode, buffering, encoding, errors, new line, all this other stuff. But the one thing it definitely expects is a file, because we can see the rest of those parameters have default values assigned to them, right? Mode, it shows that it's set default to R. And we're going to look at that in a minute. We have a nice table in our README that tells you what all these things mean, this mode. But with open, the most important thing to pass in is the name of the file. So that one says nflteams.csv. I don't have a file named nflteams.csv, so I'm going to have to fix that. Mine is called example.csv. And I can write it like this, right? Because why? Why can I just reference the name of the file? Can I do this all the time? No matter where this file is, can I always just throw in just the title of the file?
I guess because you're already in that folder, so you can reference it from there.
Exactly. I am at the same level as this file. If it was nested in a different folder, like let's call this CSV files, then this wouldn't work. This wouldn't reach it. Let's put it in there. In that case, I would have to step into CSV files. I can never remember if it's forward or backslash. We'll try that way and see how that works. I think it's a forward, actually. And I think it's a dot here too, because we're saying in our directory, step into the CSV. Okay. Syntax we'll look up later, but I think this is it. In our current directory, and then step into the CSV files one, and then find the example. Let's see if it runs. That's half the fun of it. Okay, so we have open. We pass in our file name or path to the file name. And then we say as a CSV file. This is just a variable name. This can be pretty much whatever you want, but it's helpful to keep it explicitly CSV file so you know it's a CSV file, but I can name it as bananas. And then when I come down here, I would just pass it in there, but I mean, that's confusing. Let's not do that. Let's use variable names that make sense to what we're working with, right? So we're opening with open a file name as a CSV file. So that's saying open this up and assign it to this variable. Okay, so we're opening the file up and putting it in this variable. Now we're doing another variable here because you don't just want to call these methods and not grab the values. If you call the method without assigning to a variable, that data is going to come up and go away because you're not holding it in a variable. So we've assigned it to a variable here when we open it, and here we have this reader. We're going to do another assignment. We're going to take CSV, that's this method, this module library that we're importing from Python, and the method we're calling now is called reader. So we've opened it, and now we're calling csv.reader, which, look at our first thing it expects to take in is a CSV file. The reader cannot read it without it being opened first. So make sure you open the file and then you read it. So with open, we've passed it. The CSV file is now open in this variable. So now the reader expects a CSV file, so we pass in our CSV file, our open CSV file. Now, for row in this CSV reader, we're going to print the row. So this is an easy loop. We know this. So CSV reader is actively reading through this CSV file, and it's going to be able to read each row in this file. And that's how it parses through the file. It will grab it by the rows. And so this is one row. And then this is one row. And this is one row. Let's go ahead and see what this returns then. And look, I didn't have to call it or anything because this is just a script. I'm saying open this and do, it's not a function. I haven't wrapped this in a function or anything. I've just laid out a code script here saying open the CSV file, read through it, and as you're reading through it, each row, I want you to print it on the screen. And so we could see it did just that. And I'm so glad my syntax was correct for the file path location. So we could see it went through each row and it's got them in lists. So each row is now a list, and each value within this row is at each index in this list, basically. So with this one, we can get an output of a list, and each value is going to be at each of the different indexes of that list. So a few things, like the README says, a few things to note. We have access to every row in this CSV, and every row is returned in this list of elements. We can also read it back as a dictionary. We just have to alter this reader a little bit. So reader is one of the methods from our CSV module here that we're using. But the other thing we can also do is, instead of just reader, which returns lists to us, we can call dict reader. As we started typing it, it wanted to fill it in for us. So dict reader is going to take in the iterable, or file name or file. And now for every row in this file, print the row. What do we think this is going to return? Not a trick question.
The CSV in a dictionary?
So it will return the CSV, it will return more specifically each row of the CSV in a dictionary. Is it going to be all one dictionary, or is it going to be separate dictionaries?
Separate.
Yep. Let's take a look here. Yes, we've got 3 individual dictionaries here. And we can see they're wrapped in curly braces, so we know it's a dictionary. We've got key value pairs now. So with this one, if we're wanting to read through the information, we would have to grab it by index in the list. But if we did a dict reader, we would iterate through and grab it by the key, right, to get the value. So 2 different ways to get the information output. You can have it in lists or dictionaries, whichever way you want, depending on how easy it is. Yes, Art, you have your hand raised. Sorry if it's been up for a minute. You are muted.
Oh, thank you. I have an Excel file in my mind when we're talking about this, and sometimes you need just to return a column. So if you wanted just a column, is it as easy as changing line 7 from row to column?
It is not, but we will kind of go into in my extra example. Let me see if I still have it up here. Yes, okay. Never mind, I don't have it in that example anymore. We should. Oh, is my screen still being shared? Okay. We should be able to grab just we can loop through and grab just the first index out of these. So it's going to output just everything out in a list, but you grab what you want from it programmatically afterwards. So we'll kind of look into that in a minute here. But that was a good question. We can see, let's see. Because this right here in this for loop, is this actually like something specific with CSVs? Or am I just giving a variable name for my loop?
Would be bananas.
Yep, exactly. This row, whatever we want it to be, you know. So in for loops, we could say we could throw in column, but it would still treat it as a row because that's how these are output. Let's see. I'm going to pull back up now for a little bit our README so we can see modes. So we saw when I hovered over it, you could pass in a mode as well. And that was in, let's see, I think that was in the reader. No, that was in the open. With open, we see second thing down says mode, and it says open text mode is set to R. This list here tells you the meaning of each of these modes that you can pass in. So R is read only, and it starts at the beginning of the file. So that's a perfect default mode for opening a file. So that lets you start at the top and read all the contents in this file. Read or R plus is read and write, and it starts at the beginning of the file. W is write only, truncates existing file length to 0. What does that mean? What does truncate mean? Do we know that term?
Shorten.
Shortens. Okay, so if we truncate the existing CSV file length to 0, what is that essentially doing? I'll go ahead and show you. I'm going to shorten this to 0. So that one essentially deletes the whole file and will rewrite it. So this write, be very careful. That's not going to be your first choice because that will delete everything and then write whatever you pass in. And we'll see that a little bit later here. W plus is read and write also because it's the W still. It truncates the existing file to 0, essentially erasing your whole file. A, append write only, starts at the end of the file if it exists. This sounds much nicer for a write method. This is basically what we want to do if we are storing things in a database. Let's go back to this file. So if I wanted to add something else, I don't want to delete the whole thing. I just want to add it to the end of the file, right? I just want to keep adding. So that is what you'll use for the most part while working with these CSV files is appending onto the end of the file so that all your previous data is still there. It's just tacking on more things. A plus is append, read, and write, and starts at the end of the file if it exists. B, binary file mode, probably won't use that. Research it if you're interested in it. Can't tell you much about it. And T is text file mode. Okay, so now that we see we can do different modes, we've read because that was the default, but now we're going to look at how we can write to this file, how we can insert data into this file. So we can pull data out, and we know when we pull this data out, it kind of looks like this, and we know we can manipulate this, right? If we assigned this to, instead of for row, instead of printing it, let's say teams equals empty list, right? Okay. Yeah, yep, we'll do that. Okay. This is where we'll get into the how we can manipulate or grab specific pieces of data. We'll go ahead and go there for now because we're just reading. That's all we know how to do. So I don't want to do the dictionary reader though. That one's I don't want to do that. I just want to get lists back because I know how to grab things by index, right? So I have a for loop here for every row in this reader. So it's basically going to say for every row here, I want to grab the team name and throw it in this list of teams so that at the end I can just print my team list instead of having this weird, like random output of lists in my terminal. So how do we think I could do that? So automatically what Reader does is it returns a list of the row. So for each row in this Reader, how can I return? Let's take it out of there. Let's just bring this one up. How would I target this team name in a list? If this was list, it's gonna cause errors because I don't have anything there. How would I grab Patriots from this?
List brackets 1.
Yeah, exactly. We grab it by the index number. So knowing that at every one index in these lists is going to be the name of the team, I can work with that. Problem is, this is going to go for every row in this Reader. So it's going to pull in this top one too, which we could pull that in, but I don't want that. So let's see. That's going to complicate it a little bit more. We'll revisit that. Essentially, I'd probably do a range. No. Yeah, maybe range for the length of the CSV reader, and then just skip the first one somehow. But we'll revisit that. I really haven't prepared this example at all, so I'm thinking out loud. But let's just say those headers weren't there and we're just parsing through. We can go ahead and maybe teams append row, because that's our list, right? Our list is the row. That's what's returned to us. Row 1, because we said everything at that one index is going to be the team name. So let's do that and then come down here and we'll just print teams and see how that looks. So we can see that if I wasn't as tired and on the spot, I could probably figure this out real fast. If y'all have an idea of how to take that out. But it goes through and it grabbed everything at index 1 and shoved it in my list for me. So just a quick example of how you can get the information into a more meaningful, or I guess use it in a more meaningful way versus just slapping every single row on your terminal. This, I actually did something with it. I grabbed information from each row and I'm working with that information. Okay, that was kind of a side tangent, but I thought that was kind of fun to look into at this point. And that kind of answers the question of how you could just grab all the column information. You just target the index. So now we're going to look at adding people to this list. It's going to be very similar because as we saw when we hover over this, this has mode. So we can actually use the same intro here, basically. We're going to always open our CSV file first. Like you open a book before you can read it, or you open a notebook before you can write into it. So with open this CSV file, and this time we're going to pass in that mode parameter, but instead of R, we are going to explicitly say mode equals, we're gonna set it to W first, even though I told you not to. We're gonna look at it and see if I was lying or if maybe we should have waited. So let's just see what happens. So now here's where we get a little different. So before we had open and read, right? We did opening this first, and then we did a variable name, and we used csv.reader to go through the file. Now, instead of read, we're still going to have variables assigned to this because we want to store the information as we're working with it, not just see it and it disappears. We're just going to call this NFL writer. So, underscore. I want an underscore. And we're going to still use our CSV library that we're working with. And instead of reader, now I'm going to use writer. Super easy to remember. So we can open this file, we can read it, or we can open it and we can write to it. When we hover over writer, first thing it expects is a CSV file. Look, we have a CSV file saved to a variable called CSV file. So let's go ahead and just pass that in. CSV file. Okay, so now we've opened it, and now we're saying we're going to write to it. Trying to see if this gives me the little description here. So this is basically going to say for each row in the sequence, we're going to write a row. So this method is prepping to take information in from us and write it out into the file. Okay, so we open it, we're going to write to it, and here we're going to call that variable that we said is going to be our writer. We said, okay, this variable is going to hold our writing method into this file, right? We're going to use that to write into the file. So let's go ahead and write. And here we're going to write a row. This is, again, something built in to Python. And so we've opened, we're saying we're going to write into it. We're going to use a writer, and we are now going to write a row. And you literally just pass in the information structured the same way as it expects it. So first column, it expects an ID. We're going to keep the pattern up. We have 1, 2, 3, so we're going to make a 4 here. Second column, it looks like we have the team name. So here we're going to pass in the team name. Third column, it expects wins. And then, oh, it's not a string. We're going to do an integer. And then the fourth one is losses. Okay. Alrighty. So do we think, let's see. I actually don't know. Do we know if this white space will mess it up? I'm not sure.
Yes.
It will. Is it
Mhm.
because it sees it as a character itself? Yeah. So CSV files, you usually don't have spaces between, because they're comma separated. A space is a character. So if I had a space here, it would see this whole thing as part of this value. It would see a space and a 5 as the value. So we don't have a space. If I pass in spaces, it's going to pass in a space. Or mess it up. Either way. I'm just going to go ahead and grab the next one too. We'll keep it there. We'll see what it does. This one is formatted correctly without spaces. Okay, and so that's all we have to do to write to the file. We open it, we've passed it a mode, we said we're going to write to it. We've said we're going to use a writer into the CSV file, and then we write rows. Okay, I didn't get any errors, so it did something. We can go over to our CSV file and check. Oh no, actually it didn't matter. Smart enough. I guess it took it out for us. It's trimmed it. I still probably wouldn't pass it in with spaces just to get in the habit of looking at CSVs and realizing you shouldn't have spaces. It will mess up like data processing apps that expect just no white space in between things. I've had apps break that I had to remove a white space at the end of a CSV row. So it will mess it up. Don't have spaces. But if you leave a space in, it's okay. Python's smart enough. This right row iterates through, I guess, an iterable. So we passed in a list. So it iterates through and grabs what you passed in the list and puts it in. But as we can see, I used write. So with write, it truncates the file to 0. So it deleted the whole file and then it wrote out what I wanted. So that is why we don't use write, unless if you want to always start from scratch and just wipe it out completely. Chances are you don't want to do that. So simple way to fix that. Let's go ahead and go back. Art, you had a question?
Yes, if we had a text file in this folder, we could open that text file, add to it, subtract to it, and that would just save directly by writing into that text file. Why doesn't a CSV file work the same way?
So you mean if I had just a text and I wanted to do write methods here that just interacted with the text file?
No. Just as far as the idea of manipulating the text file. So we if we just wanted to say like write some notes or something like that, we could create a text file, and then when we open it in Python, we could write directly to that text file. So I'm thinking if we have a CSV file in our folder here, why can't you just like on line 5 start adding teams and losses and stuff like that?
Well, I very well could. Absolutely could. However, when you are working in your applications, like on the front end, the user is not going to have access to this CSV file to be able to go ahead and type in all that stuff. This is kind of emulating a database that you don't have direct access to write to, like right here, basically. So you have to access it through your program instead of just tabbing over and working in the file itself. So that sets up safeguards too, so that the file can't be messed with. There will usually be a lot of authorization in between a program that accesses the database and manipulates information in there. So you don't want people just coming over and adding stuff. But yeah, I absolutely could just enter down a line and add things to this file and it would still read it. But we're getting to the point where we want to mirror, like if somebody's signing up on a website for, they want to sign up for an account, basically. They're going to say, it's going to prompt you to submit a username and password to sign up. So when they click a button, it's basically going to do something like this, where it opens the database and inputs that information into the database for us. Did that answer your question? Over answer it?
No, that makes it clear because when you break it down, like something like a website, that user obviously or whoever's putting the information obviously is going to have access to that database. So there has to be a means to access that database. So yeah, that's a great explanation. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, I guess that wasn't very you're just saying we're having our first database here, but yeah, we're building from the ground up. So that is a good question though. And if I got frustrated and I messed this up, honestly, I probably would just delete the whole file and rebuild it instead of doing a program to do that for me. But okay, so we just realized that when we ran this in write mode, it deleted everything and then wrote in our rows. We don't want that. We want it to persist. Let me see. We're going to do something. If you've noticed, I've had lines down here, trailing lines after my last thing. I'm going to remove those. We're just going to have exactly the same number of lines we have in this file. And I'm going to change. So what should I do? What do y'all think I should do if I don't want to delete the whole thing? What mode should I use? to just add these lines on the bottom of my file.
Append a mode.
That's right.
Yeah.
We're gonna just append it. We're gonna throw it on the bottom. So we'll run this again. No errors. All right, good. Let's check it out. Whoa, that's weird. So it looks like it put it like on the same line as my last one. And that is because when you don't have an extra line down here, it starts where the end of the file is, where your cursor ends basically. So I didn't have an extra line for it. Cursor wasn't down there, so it stuck it on the end and then went down to the next row and created the next one. So that is why we always have at least one empty row on the bottom ready to get that. So let's go ahead and run it again. And now we can see it did correctly. And it automatically creates a new row each time. So you don't have to go check and make sure. Whenever you write to this or append to this file, it will make sure there's a new line underneath. The last thing we're going to look at is we can also write. So this one writes the rows in a list format, right? We passed it in as a list into here. Just like reading, we were able to read and make a list and then read and make a dictionary. We could do the same thing with writing. We can write using a list to pass in, and we can write using a dictionary to pass in. So key value pairs. This one is a little different in structure. So we'll go ahead and see that. So we've got our, it's still going to be with open. We always got to open it first before we can do anything with it. We're going to open our file name. We're still going to append to it because we are still writing teams in there. I'm going to delete these teams so that because we're just rewriting them again. Okay, and as CSV file, we're saving it to this variable so we can use it later. So now, instead of all this stuff, first thing we got to start off with is field names. What do we think field names are in respect to our CSV file? I'm going to start typing some field names and you tell me what they are.
Those are headers?
Yes, exactly. These are the column headers that are associated with each of these columns. So we had ID, teams, wins, losses. Here we have the same setup here in order: ID, team, wins, losses. So we identify what fields are in our file first because we're going to be doing key value pairs now. We're not just going to throw in lists where it could just easily, line everything up. Now we're going to do key value pairs. So after we open and we identify our field names, we are going to get a variable here because we're going to write again. So we have our field names. Now we want to write to it. We're going to still do CSV now, not writer, but yeah, I didn't even type anything. We can see it has dict reader and dict, I'm trying to say it with the T at the end, dict writer as well. So that's what we're going to use because now we want to pass in a dictionary instead of a list to add to our file. So when we do that and we hover over, we can see the first thing it expects is a file, F for file. So what is our file again? Where did we save our file in this? What variable do I have my file saved as?
CSV file.
Yes, correct. We opened our file and we have it sitting there open and waiting as a CSV file. This is the variable we've assigned it to. So this dict writer expects a file. We've got a file open and it's sitting in the CSV variable, CSV file variable. Okay. And And that's not the only thing I have to pass in. We hover over, look, the next thing that doesn't have a default value assigned to it is field names. Hey, good thing we just identified what our field names are on the line above it, right? So we've got the file we passed in, and now we need to pass in field names as well. The rest of these we don't need because we can see they all have default values assigned to them. So if I don't pass them in, it's fine. It'll default to everything that works fine. But so we need the file and we need field names. And again, we're going to explicitly say field names equals, because even though it is the second parameter being passed in, you just don't want to risk it. There's a lot of parameters you can pass into this. So go ahead and just explicitly say, I'm going to pass in field names now. And field names, we save them into this field names variable. All right, so now we've got our dictionary writer. We passed in our file and the field names that it expects with that. So kind of like the list writing, when we just use CSV.writer, after we've opened, we've said we're going to write to it. Now we can actually write our rows. So it's the same thing here. We're going to call our writer because this is how we're writing to our file. And we're going to write row. Now, we can see when I have that method here, it expects a dictionary, row dictionary. So you will pass it in, you will pass in a dictionary. And I hate typing out dictionaries, so we're going to go ahead and just copy this from here. Dictionary full of key value pairs. So we still have the key is ID, value for, and the like. All right, I guess we'll pull both of them in. So this is telling it to expect dictionaries to write in there. We're going to run this. We got no errors in our terminal. Let's look at the file, and it definitely wrote those into this file with ease. All right, that was it for lecture today. Just showing you how to read and write to CSV files. And somebody tell me again, what are the two ways we can read and write to like CSV files? Two different data structures we can use to read and write. It's all over my screen here.
Dictionaries and lists.
Yep, exactly. Dictionaries and lists. So those are the two data structures we can use to read and write to CSV files. Okay, any questions before I end the lecture recording? We go over an extra problem. All right, let me, oh, I almost ended class. That was not the thing to do. Okay.